Hi, welcome back to my channel and another video today. Happy Halloween as well to everybody. I thought I'd come up with a fun list to give you on Halloween Day, October 31st. And I'm going to be giving you my top 25 horror movies of all time. This is my personal favourites list. Managed to compile it. I couldn't really decide on a number and ended up that 25 was a nice selection of really good horror films of the many hundreds that I've seen before. So if you're looking for a good movie and horror to watch tonight, you can't go wrong with anything on this list, I promise you that. So I'll try not to ramble on too long on each of the movies, otherwise we'll be here for hours. So let's dive straight into the list, starting at number 25, and I'm going with The Others. Now, a movie that I saw very young, so it terrified me at an early age. It might be a little bit of that that's made it stick with me so much, but just this amazing sort of haunted house story set during the era of World War II, where you've got this family, the husband's out fighting at war, and you've got Nicole Kidman, this very stressed mother, trying to look after these two young kids who are difficult and also have this very unusual condition where they can't be exposed to any light. So they're in this dark, isolated house out in the fog, the middle of nowhere, and also dealing with this haunted house. And when you look over the years at how many haunted house, supernaturally type horror movies we get, they all just become a massive blur to me, and The Others really stands out amongst the pack. I watched it again about a year ago, still really holds up. It's a great drama, great horror, pretty scary, and a really mad twist and explanation for what's really been going on. So highly recommended if you've never seen it before. Number 24, we've got the original Halloween from 1978, John Carpenter's original slasher film. Pretty much one of the real pioneers in slasher movies. It kind of led to the whole wave of slashers and horror sequels and stuff we got throughout the 80s and various rip-offs. And this original was quite special. It's a very simple film, but there's something about John Carpenter, his directing style, the way he handles such a simple story. It just grips you right from the start and never lets go. It's a great idea for a story. It really sets that kind of autumn Halloween-y vibe. Obviously started the career of Jamie Lee Curtis as well. And, just everything mixed with that great score, the great casting of each of these characters. Sam Loomis with Donald Pleasance. Just everything about it really works. A really great horror film, and one I love to go back and revisit every year around this time. Number 23 is a film from the 80s called The Hitcher, and this is one I don't hear get talked about an awful lot. It's definitely one of the most underrated films from the 80s. If ever there's an underrated list, this would be on it. And I checked this out after seeing Rutger Hauer in Blade Runner, just an absolutely fascinating actor to watch, and hearing he was in this horror movie, this kind of road trip where a young guy picks up a hitchhiker who turns out to be a complete and utter psychopath, and it's got a little bit of depth to it as well, where you don't really know what this guy's about, what he's trying to do, why. Is he trying to teach him a lesson? Is he just doing it for sport, for fun of killing? And it's a really wild story, and yeah, very memorable film that will stay with you. Amazing performance by Rutger Hauer as well. If you haven't heard of this one before, please check this one out. Number 22 is The Conjuring. As I said with The Others, I'm not a massive fan of the sort of supernatural horror films. We get so many of them, so many generic ones. But The Conjuring has just always really stood out to me. It's beautifully directed by James Wan. Just a really nice cast with Vera Farmiga, Patrick Wilson, such watchable actors, and just a great little drama of them dealing with it's basically almost like an Exorcist, a modern Exorcist remake in a lot of ways, whereas it's the mother here going through this demonic possession and they come in to try and help her. And yeah, it's just got the movie's got a great vibe, some really scary sequences, very interesting, very entertaining, very natural dialogue. Just something about the whole thing really works for me, and every so often I find myself just really wanting to go back and revisit this one. Definitely one of James Wan's best movies. Number 21 is The Invisible Man, one of the newer movies on this list. One that we got at the beginning of 2020, a year that did not have many good releases, obviously with COVID and everything. So I don't know if it's just because of that. This one really stands out to me. Great performance by the lead actress, Elizabeth Moss, kind of telling this. It's a remake of an older sort of sci-fi horror film, and it's all about this woman basically dealing with this domestic abuse case, manages to escape, thinks her ex-husband is gone, and it's kind of going through the paranoia of feeling like he's still stalking her in her life, and as in this extreme case he actually is. So yeah, it's a really wild movie, definitely worth checking out. A few really memorable scares in it as well, a particular one in the attic involving some paint, which I won't spoil here, but my god, it gave me a heart attack. It's a must-watch horror movie. Number 20 is Jeepers Creepers, a movie that people don't really talk about anymore, just because of all of the criminal background of the director, which is pretty nasty and kind of taints the movie in a bad light. But I saw this movie when I was quite young with my best mate Josh. We sat together at the age of sort of 10 or 11 whenever this came to video and watched it on this tiny TV, and I was absolutely terrified by this movie, and it's just always stuck with me. I always go back to this one and revisit it. It's a bit of nostalgia, but I genuinely think it's a really creative, really well done horror film, particularly the first half. I think looking at, in America, those big open roads going through the middle of nowhere, they just out of nowhere get rammed off the road by this truck, seemingly unrelated. A few moments later they see this guy dumping bodies down a pipe, and where it goes from there, turning into almost this creature feature monster movie. It's just absolutely wild, so unpredictable, and just a very unique film, and just something about the whole vibe of it I just really, really like. It's not a perfect film, there's definitely some problems towards the end, but I can't help but love this one. Number 19, the classic Nightmare on Elm Street, Wes Craven's original slasher film. Did do a full review for this one recently if you want to hear my kind of in-depth thoughts on the movie. I kind of spoke at length about all of my feelings on this film, but it's really brilliant. I've seen it a number of times throughout my life. Wes Craven really had an eye for this kind of horror film. It's such a creative idea. Obviously creating the iconic Freddy Krueger as well. Just so many amazing sequences, great lead character. I do think in some ways maybe it's not quite as tight of a film as Halloween is, but I think it's just the whole idea of Freddy Krueger, the dream world and everything like that just puts it a little bit above for me. There's something just a bit more interesting about it, even though I do think in some ways it is a more flawed movie than Halloween. Number 18, we've got Barbarian, another new one on this list, and I know it might be a bit of recency bias, but I went to see this when it first came out knowing absolutely nothing, and I was in a cinema screening completely on my own, and what an experience it was. The first act is really quite terrifying. You have no idea where the thing's going. Goes in all sorts of unpredictable directions. The tone change in the middle that kind of brings some humour and some light to it in a way that really works, and just has a really crazy conclusion. Just such a memorable experience for me. Definitely, I would actually go as far as saying it's the best horror film now we've had of the 2020s. I've seen it a number of times and it's really pretty good. It's a first time director as well, low budget, but damn, what a good horror movie. Number 17 is Jaws, the classic Steven Spielberg horror movie from 1975. A movie that I haven't always loved, but I'm finding the more and more I rewatch it as I get older as well, I'm just like, wow, this really is almost a perfect horror movie. It's something about the whole structure of it, these great characters all brought together in this circumstance, characters that would never really all be hanging out together, and just something about them dealing with this situation of this great big killer shark is just so gripping, particularly the lead up to the final act as well, where they're out on that ship finally looking for it to destroy it, and yeah, just some really brilliant sequences, really memorable lines of dialogue, great characters, and the fact that they had so many issues with the practical effects on the shark actually makes it so much better. If you showed too much of that great big rubbery shark, it probably would have looked really cheap and not aged that well, but the fact they had to hide a lot of it because of its issues made it so much more effective, so it really gives everything that happens in that final act so much punch. What a brilliant film. Number 16 is It Follows, another, I say relatively new, it's 10 years old now, and just such a creative movie that, something about the whole mood and vibe, atmosphere of this film just always has me coming back to watch it. It's definitely unique. Obviously, it does take some ideas from stuff like The Ring, this kind of idea where something happens to you, it basically plants a curse on you, and then it follows you, and it can be passed on to the next person through various things. So not entirely original. It kind of takes an idea and does something different with it, and just does it in a really amazing way here. But it's a really creepy film. There's some particularly scenes that really will send a chill down your spine. A particular scene with this tall man who walks through a doorway just really caught me off guard out of nowhere, and it was pretty freaky stuff. But just the music, the disaster piece score for this, the whole vibe of the film, just it works. It really works, and yeah. One that I always tell people about when they are looking for horror recommendations. So if you haven't seen It Follows, please check this one out. Number 15 for me is The Fly by David Cronenberg. I did a big binge watch earlier this year of David Cronenberg films. I hadn't really seen many of his before, and this is the one that really stood out to me as being the best. I did review it on the channel as well, but what an incredible film. It's this kind of experiment gone wrong, and then it diving into the full Cronenberg style. You know, he loves this kind of body horror, creature, madness, all this kind of stuff, with this poor scientist whose experiment goes terribly wrong. And it's also this tragic love story as well, where he meets this character played by Gina Davis, and as they're really hitting it off and everything's going so well, everything starts to go downhill for him. And just a really gripping story, great horror film, some really disgusting, gnarly stuff in this that you want to look away, but you also can't take your eyes off the screen, but just got on a real emotional core to it as well. I was trying to think in my head, I was like, why do people revere The Fly so much? I can't imagine it being that good, and it just is. Just something about the whole thing really works. You know, a film that's nearly 40 years old now, and just really still holds up, so definitely give that one a go if you're not familiar with the works of David Cronenberg. Number 14, going back to John Carpenter again, this time with The Thing. Another movie that I find the more and more I watch this one, the more I like it. And actually, interestingly enough, it was one that the big critics of the day in the early 80s didn't really gel with this film. It's one that in hindsight and more over the years, people have really come around to it and come to really respect it as the masterpiece that it is. But again, it's just so well done with the creativity. It's really amazing creature design, just so bizarre, so creepy. Vivid memories the first time I saw this, with that first scene where you really get to see this thing as it's infecting all of the dogs in the pen on this outpost base, and just, yeah, something about it, I just can't forget it. You know, it's just imagery that will stay with you for life when you think of movies. And just watching this team of guys just descend into absolute chaos as this bizarre creature wreaks havoc around this base out in the snow. It's just an absolutely gripping horror movie. Some amazing, gnarly practical effects work as well, and a really sort of downbeat and bleak ending that just really works for the film. It really does pack a punch, this one, and definitely one of my favourite horror movies from the 80s. Number 13, I'm going with The Sixth Sense. So this was an M. Night Shyamalan film. Technically not his first film, but it's really the first film that kind of made him a big kind of known director. And, you know, I do defend Shyamalan quite a bit. I kind of like some of his movies in an odd way, but this is the only movie of his I think I would actually call great. It's the one that really stands out. And he did it so early in his career, but it's an amazing horror film. I checked this out originally because when I was at school, I think it had played on TV one night when I was young, and all the kids at school I was with were telling me that I looked just like the young boy from The Sixth Sense. It's actually unbelievable how similar we looked when we were young, but I had to seek this movie out, and I've just loved it ever since. Seen it a number of times, and it's a movie as well that's often remembered because of how insane the twist is. And don't get me wrong, that twist is amazing, but it's also just an amazing film as well. I love the performance from Bruce Willis here. You know, very subtle performance from him. I love these kind of more quiet type movies that he does. He really sort of sells his character. Amazing chemistry with the young lad played by Haley Joel Osment as well. A really good child actor. They're often very difficult to find, but he did an amazing job. And just a really great drama, great horror, great story, and just, yeah, quite a brilliant film. So easily Shyamalan's best film that he ever made. Number 12, going with Midsummer, Ari Aster's second movie. Basically almost like a bit of a Wicker Man remake in some ways, with a little bit more depth, a bit more of a character story as well, about this young woman kind of going through the grief after this really horrific family tragedy, and is taken out to this Swedish festival with these strange people who do all these kind of pagan rituals and all this sort of stuff, and things descend into madness and chaos, and because of her sort of mental state at the time, she becomes completely engulfed by it. And yeah, it's a very disturbing film. I've seen it a couple of times now, and some scenes really hit hard. But you know, it's not a film for everyone. I've heard quite a lot of people really criticise and put down this movie, but I think Ari Aster is quite a masterful director, really. Whatever he does, it certainly works for me. He knows how to get to me, how to really disturb me in a way that a lot of other horror movies I don't think know how to do. So these definitely leave an impact. It's definitely a long film. It's 2.5 hours. It's quite drawn out. It's very slow, but something about the whole experience just really works for me. It's a really nicely made horror film that will stay with you just because of how disturbing it really is. And just above that, at number 11, Ari Aster's first film, Hereditary. Yes, I'm a little bit of an Ari Aster fanboy. I do believe the hype is real for his movies, because I don't know what it was, when I saw these when they came out, they just really hit me. I think I was used to kind of seeing, when you've seen so much horror, there's not much that really scares you anymore, that kind of gets to you in the same way as when you were younger. And Hereditary, even for me, was a cinema experience where I came out just like, whoa. That was a lot. That film was actually a lot. It really does deliver on the horror, amazing atmosphere, really creepy. And it's a supernaturally type of film, which usually that kind of stuff doesn't affect me. I'm not a spiritual type of person, but it's undeniable. The atmosphere of this film just feels so wrong, and just something is so off about it. And there's a few really shocking scenes in the movie, amazing performances as well, especially Toni Collette. Just make this whole drama about grief and a disturbed family dynamic, just brings the whole thing round to this movie that is a complete and utter nightmare. And it just grips you and does not let go for well over a 2-hour runtime. So I've seen it a couple of times since, and it still holds up. It's a hell of a movie. You know, I think it's one of those that genuinely does deserve the hype and should definitely be considered in the conversation as one of the scariest movies we've ever had. Okay, so getting into the top 10 now, my 10 favourite horror movies that have ever been made. For me personally, at number 10, I'm going with American Werewolf in London. And just a movie that I have so much fun with this one. It's a comedy horror really in a lot of ways, but it's one of those, it's easily the best werewolf film I think that's ever been made. I know I am wearing my Howling shirt right now, if you can see that. Another werewolf movie I love, but something about Werewolf in London, the combination of the fun characters, the fun moments, but also with this really kind of gnarly horror film. Just something about the whole thing really works. You know, some really funny stuff as well, having these two American guys over in the UK in London, familiar places that I know, just as this absolute madness is going down after one of them is bitten by a werewolf. And I just absolutely love this movie. The werewolf transformation scene is, you know, it actually disturbed me quite a bit. I saw it when I was a lot younger, and you know, you watch it and there's something funny about it just because of David Norton's dialogue. There's things he's saying where he's kind of making a joke of it, but there's something just really wrong about it as well, and how quickly this thing hits as his transformation begins and the effects work on it. It just looks absolutely amazing. Just it's one of those scenes that really stays with you. But some really great horror in here as well. The dream sequences where he's dreaming of the sort of Nazi monsters coming into the house, and he's out in the woods chasing animals around. Just some really bizarre, creepy stuff in this film that, yeah, I just really love. I love the whole feel of this movie. Great characters, great story, and just a really cracking horror movie and a must-watch from the 1980s. Number 9, it is Get Out. Definitely for me, my favourite horror movie of the last 10 years. Just, you know, it's one actually was even nominated for an Oscar. You know, it's one more movie on this list that was recognised by the Oscars in horror, but absolutely deserving. So, you know, it's very unique. You've got this brand new big horror director coming along with Jordan Peele. Originally, of course, has a background in comedy. but just did something so interesting with this movie. A lot of social commentary, of course, in there about race, things that are, that he kind of wanted to talk about in his movies in a new and interesting way, and just does it really, really well. There's nothing it's not really one of those movies. Obviously now I feel like when movies are kind of talking about race and stuff, people automatically sort of want to roll their eyes at, oh, not again, more movies pushing social issues forward and all this kind of stuff. But Get Out just does it in a really interesting and unique way that really does pack a punch as well. And just as a horror movie in its own right, it's just this really crazy story, great actors, really interesting directions it goes in, like when you get to the kind of twists of what's really going on, just really all very bizarre and entertaining to watch. But it's got some really effective scares in there as well, and there's just something about Get Out, the whole feel of this movie just works really, really well. It builds and builds. You're really interested in all the drama between these characters, and then it all goes explosive in the final act with some really crazy stuff that I won't spoil, just in case anybody hasn't that's been living under a rock and hasn't seen Get Out. But easily for me, one of the big standouts in horror of the 21st century. Number 8, we're going with the British horror film The Descent, and it's actually not my number 1 British horror film. We've got one more to go on this list after this, so see if you can guess what that is. But The Descent for me is the second best of those, and just a fantastic film. It's so bizarre that this director, Neil Marshall, how he started off with all of his best films and in my mind just went downhill from there. Something just completely so strange about that, where his first 2 movies, this and Dog Soldiers, were just fantastic, and particularly The Descent. It's one of those horror movies where the initial setup, where you have these group of women, these young women who have gone, one of them's gone for a bit of a tragedy, and there's a little bit of drama between them, and they decide to kind of go out on this cave diving expedition, taking a bit of a chance, just having a bit of an adventure together, and all of it goes wrong, where they go down this cave they weren't meant to and get stuck down there. And that would be horror. That would be enough to create a really intense claustrophobic horror film. And then you get the twist of what's also actually going on in those caves as well. Again, I'll try not to spoil things as I go along, but what ends up actually is going on in these caves as well, it's just unbelievably intense and a claustrophobic movie. And yeah, it just feels so, I don't know what the word is for it, just like you really feel like you're with these women in this situation, like where one of them gets injured by something, and when it all starts to really kick off, you really feel for them and you're just dying for them to get out of this horrendous situation. And in typical British fashion, it ends in a really bleak and nasty way, in a way that I think really fits the film. Apparently in the US they actually decided to make an alternate cut for it, which kind of changed that ending to a more happy ending. So yeah, I love this original version, but it's just an unbelievably intense horror movie, really well acted, really well made, and just, yeah, one that I go back to revisit and will do again many more times. Number 7, I'm going with Silence of the Lambs. I know some people don't actually consider this to be a horror movie. It's interesting actually, it's the first horror movie really that had big Oscar recognition, obviously winning Best Picture and sweeping up in a load of other stuff as well. And people often refer to it as, no, it's a thriller, psychological thriller or whatever. But at the end of the day, Anthony Hopkins as Hannibal Lecter, this serial killer who eats people, it feels like a horror movie to me. So it's the one time the Oscars actually decided to recognise a horror film, and absolutely rightly so, because this is an absolute classic. It's an incredible movie, just a really gripping story, this kind of drama about this young police detective played by Jodie Foster, who's trying to track down and hunt out this serial killer, and she's getting the help from somebody who's maybe even more psychotic, of course, with Hannibal Lecter, just with such an iconic and memorable performance from Anthony Hopkins, just absolutely haunting. Everything he says, every line, just sickening, and you just can't take your eyes off him, and you get why she's so sort of obsessed with him and wants to kind of get close to him and understand more about him, even though she's also kind of scared of him as well. And you just really feel that with his character. But it's just a great drama, it's a great story, and again, it's one of those films where you're just absolutely gripped by from start to finish. Every single scene in this movie is interesting and engaging. It's an absolute classic, and one I've revisited so many times and always find more and more things to appreciate about it. So not just one of the best horror movies ever made, but one of the best films ever made, period, in my opinion. Number 6, I'm going with the original Alien. I did talk about this film quite recently in my Alien ranking, so I won't go into too much detail, but funny enough, one of Ridley Scott's earliest films, or his second ever film, is actually, in my opinion, his best film. And he just did something so masterful with Alien. It's an incredible horror film. I can only imagine what this must have been like watching it, knowing nothing. Because obviously by now, if you haven't seen Alien, every single scene has been spoiled by, videos online and documentaries on horror, everything like that. The famous chest burster scene, all this kind of stuff, and the amazing H.R. Giger alien design. Just so many iconic things about this film. And I think it's just the fact that it feels like a bunch of real people that you're going along with. It's very natural. It's got a very slow build up, and you feel so immersed. It's so real feeling that when everything really kicks off, you're immersed in this situation with these characters, and you can really feel the terror that's going on. I don't really like, being up in space, and the idea of being locked away in space where nobody can contact you, and just with this weird creature that you know nothing about. Something about that is just so disturbing, and this film basically takes that premise and executes it with perfection. So an incredible horror film. Number 5 for me is going to be Black Swan. This is another movie on this list that maybe some people wouldn't consider to be horror, but for me it definitely is a horror, and it's a drama in equal measure, and just an absolutely amazing one at that. Just an incredible performance by Natalie Portman, playing this character of this ballet dancer with an obsessive mother, trying to get her to become like absolute perfection, training for Swan Lake. And when she kind of is working with this director who needs her to kind of be in touch with this kind of more darker, more sexual side of herself to really bring out this character in Swan Lake, she has to go to some very dark places in order to become perfect for this part. And it's just an absolutely gripping film. It's easily, for me, Darren Aronofsky's best movie, because I think even though he's quite an amazing and unique filmmaker, he does have a tendency to sometimes go too off the rails with the weirdness to where it actually starts to derail from the story that's going on. But here it gets the perfect balance. You've got the grounded stuff, and there's also a little bit of a more fantastical element as well, but it just all really adds to the effect of this story. And I hadn't seen this one again for some time, and earlier this year I gave it another rewatch, and I was just like, wow, what a great film. So definitely my favourite film from that year that it came out, and just so memorable for me. It's an incredible horror film, incredible drama, and one that's easily deserving for me of this spot on the list. Number 4 now, and this is my favourite British horror film, and that is 28 Days Later. And this is a movie where everything about this movie just works for me. This was directed by Danny Boyle and also written by Alex Garland. And if you are familiar with Alex Garland, all the stuff he's gone on to make, all of the sci-fi stuff with the interesting philosophy and concepts, and he's just a really interesting guy and brings some really interesting commentary and ideas to his films, and you can feel that running all the way through 28 Days Later, even though it is primarily a zombie movie. It's an apocalypse film. And just an early performance by Cillian Murphy as well, and just so iconic, those first few scenes where he's out wandering in the empty streets of London. I live here in London, and I know I've never, you don't really ever get a chance, unless you're up at like 5 in the morning on a Sunday, you'll never get to see London anything like this, and those amazing shots of him wandering around in empty London. It's just absolutely haunting, and it just goes on to be this incredible zombie film. And I think it's just a combination of the characters, the amazing John Murphy score with it. It's just the whole feel of this movie just really works. And it's quite dark in a lot of ways, when you kind of get into the second half with this army base. And again, it's not just like a normal zombie film where it's just them, a bunch of characters trying to survive. It's kind of talking about a future and what happens when there's nobody really left. What do humans do if we're just kind of left to our own devices with no government, no leadership? What kind of happens to us all in this apocalyptic world, just full of really interesting ideas and executed with just absolute brilliance. And yeah, this is a movie I come back to and revisit so often, and the more I see it, I'm just like, damn, this is just... it's a really, really incredible horror film. And like I said with The Descent, it's got that harsh bleakness that runs through it, as typical with British movies, but something about it just works. So really, really fantastic horror movie, and it's my number 4. Okay, into the top 3 now. These are 3 of my favourite movies of all time, horror or not. But number 3, I'm going with Aliens, the sequel to Alien. Again, is it a horror film? Is it action? Is it sci-fi? It's kind of a blend of all of those. I did also talk about it, of course, in more detail in my Alien ranking, so you can see all my thoughts there. But just an incredible sequel. And it's interesting for me because I'm usually somebody who tends to lean more horror than action, typically speaking, but something about this sequel, it just really builds on everything set up in the first. I think it's the way the Ripley character is then developed, how she becomes this much more interesting character in this story. You're introduced to all of these Marines that you think are going to be kind of typical characters, but they're all given such depth, and by the end you fall in love with all of these characters and you're dying for them to get out of this situation. And it's just a hell of a ride, this movie, from arriving back on this planet and discovering that these aliens have colonized the place. And it's just, it's an absolute nightmare, and how wrong everything goes. They're trying to escape this place, and just, it's an incredible horror movie. It really is. Just fantastic characters, great special effects. It just builds and builds. It does not let up, and just some of the best scenes in film we've ever had. James Cameron, I know some people aren't massive fans of his. He's dedicated his whole life to Avatar now, but God, when he started out his career early on with films like the Terminator films and Aliens, just made perfect films for me, in my opinion. So Aliens, number 3. My top 2, so difficult to decide between these because I love them both kind of for different reasons. But ultimately, number 2, I've landed on putting Scream. Talked about Scream on this channel so many times, done reviews for it and everything, but I just love this movie to death. It's probably my most rewatched film maybe ever. It's just such a tight movie. It's so clever. It's a fun movie to watch. It's something that people that even aren't into horror can appreciate and really enjoy. And it's also great for us horror fans as well. This was easily, for me, the best movie that Wes Craven ever made. And I think it's because it captures the funness that a horror film needs to have, whilst also hitting hard as well where it needs to. It's got the scares, it's got some powerful moments, but it's just so fun to go along with these characters and this really snappy dialogue, and something about the whole movie just really gels. And I think it's just so tightly edited, perfectly paced. Every single scene has got something interesting and fun going on, and just, it's a really fantastic film with just one of the most memorable opening sequences of all time with Drew Barrymore. Really amazing stuff. This is a 5-star horror film for me, and again, on a different day this might be my number 1, but it's the best slasher film that's ever made, and probably my favourite film from the 90s. Just absolutely love this movie to death. And after some meditating on it last night when I was thinking of making this video, I've decided my number 1 has to go to The Shining. Just one of the best horror films, well, for me, the best horror film, and one of the best films that's ever been made by Stanley Kubrick back in 1980, and just quite an amazing film. It's easily the best Stephen King story that was ever adapted to film. And to think that he actually didn't like Stanley Kubrick's telling of this story is just baffling to me, because I think he just did a phenomenal job with this film. This was the first movie as well that really got me obsessed with an actor. Jack Nicholson's performance as Jack Torrance, the man who's kind of going crazy in the isolation over the winter at the Overlook Hotel, and just a haunting and amazing performance by Jack Nicholson, where he's funny, scary, intimidating, interesting, all in one. And just, after that, I looked up Jack Nicholson. I had to see everything that he had ever been in. Just so many incredible sequences from this film. The bartender Lloyd. I've had so many fun quotes from those scenes in that movie. Just all of the amazing stuff with, of course, the Here's Johnny, the scene that basically drove all of the actors crazy, where Stanley Kubrick actually wanted to capture a genuine look of madness on these actors' faces, so you genuinely buy. When by the time he's pulling that axe through the door and Shelley Duvall's character is trying to escape, you're like, damn, she's genuinely fearing for her life here. It's just an immersive horror film. It's kind of bizarre in a lot of ways. When you look at the story, it's so unique and just got so many weird, ambiguous elements to it that people discuss even to this day. It doesn't conclude nicely with your sort of typical ending, so it leaves loads of stuff to talk about. It's a deep film, and just, yeah, so many incredible horror sequences, such a standout movie. So yeah, The Shining for me, just quite an incredible experience of a film. Definitely one of the best movies ever made, and for me personally, my absolute #1 favourite horror movie. So thank you so much for watching my video. Really hope you've enjoyed this one. Please let me know down in the comments what you think of my list, and also let me know some of your favourite horror movies of all time. Thanks so much for watching this video. Do take care, and I'll see you next time.